Okay, so again, it's tomorrow's part. Like I said, the heading says 6.1 to 6.5, test part 2 with calculator. But it is really just 6.3 and only 2 topics. The first topic is finding the trig function of an angle in radians. So you already took a test on this in degrees. Now we're doing it in radians. So you would see something like find the cosine of pi over 5 or find the secant of 2.347. There's not a degree symbol on that, so both of those are in radians. So in the calculator, the first thing you have to make sure is that the calculator is in radians. So you want to go to your mode, you want to make sure it's in radians, and then if it was cosine of pi over 5, I would just do cosine pi divided by 5, and this is 0.80901 and so on and so forth. If it says to round to the nearest 10,000th or 4 decimal places, it would be 0.8090. Everybody good on that one? Yeah? And by everybody, I mean the 3 of you that are still talking to me. So yeah? Okay. Your mode button? Which calculator you got? You got it? Okay. I just said rounded to 4, but just pay attention to whatever it says on the test. Good morning, Natalie. We're just talking about what's on the part 2 of your test tomorrow. All right, then you get something like secant of 2.347, and although that doesn't have a pi in it, that's still in radians because there's no degree symbol. So in my calculator, I'm going to do 1 divided by cosine of 2.347. Yeah.
So when do you do it as like cosine and then
-1?
Minus?
Yeah, so that's, cosine minus. You mean the cosine -1?
Yeah.
That's the next kind.
And that's when the cosine goes not in the denominator?
Correct.
But what's the one where it's like cosine and you do like 1 divided by?
That's what she's talking about.
It's the same
So
thing.
if it said secant -1, that's when you do that.
But only when it's -1.
Correct. Good morning, Katrine.
The one minus where if it's like secant, cosecant.
So that is one type of problem on your test when you're finding the trig function of the angle. The second type is when you're finding the angle given the trig function. It will say 0 to 2 pi, and this is where not only do we have to hit the right button, right, but we also have to figure out what quadrant it's in, because remember, most of these have 2 answers. Not all of them, but most of them have 2 answers. Good morning, Ariana. So the first type was finding the trig function of the angle, and again, your calculator needs to be in radians. The second part is finding the angle given the trig value, and on the cycle of 0 to 2 pi. So when I do this, it's important to know all students take calculus, because, so let's say, for example, I said find sine -1 of 0.345. So the very first thing I'm going to do is figure out what quadrants this value would lie in. Sine positive means that this is going to be in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 2, because that's where sine is positive.
If I'm where sine is positive, wait, why if it was like -0.345, would it be where sine is negative?
Yep.
Okay.
So remember, if it's,
like the -1.
say again.
Like even though it says sine -1, you find where like that's not the
The negative 1 just means I'm giving you, this is the trig value, you have to give me the angle. So that's what the negative 1 on the exponent means. Yep. So that would be different than, the answer is going to be different, sine negative 1 if it was negative 0.345. Okay? Because in the first quadrant, S or theta, whatever the angle is, good morning, Ethan, equals whatever the angle is. So if it's theta, then it's the same. We leave it alone, okay, in the first quadrant. In the second quadrant, remember we used to do 180 minus the angle when it was in degrees. Now we do pi minus the angle because we're in radians. In the third quadrant, we would normally do 180 plus the angle. Now we do pi plus the angle because, again, we're in radians. And in the third quadrant, we used to do 360 minus the angle. So now we do 2 pi, which is the equivalent of 360, minus the angle. So for the first example, where sine negative 1 is positive, I'm going to do second sine 0.345. And I get 0.352.
Are we still in radians?
Yeah, always in radians. The whole test you're going to be in radians. So that's the value where sine, right, is 0.345. Because quadrant 1 is already where sine is positive, that's one of my answers, and I leave it alone. Quadrant 1, you don't change anything. It's also positive in quadrant 2, and in quadrant 2, we do pi minus that value. So I'm going to do pi minus 0.3522. And I get 2.7894. So those two angles in radians are where my sine is 0.345. Now here's the good news on these. They're easy to check. Go ahead, Sophia.
I'm not getting this.
Which one, the 2.7?
Yeah.
You did pi, like the pi button, minus 0.3522. But here, like, this is the good news, is I can check these super easily. I'm going to do sine, so to check, I'm going to do sine, just regular sine, of 0.3522 and sine of 2.7894. And what I should get for both of them is the original question. So sine of 0.522 is 0.3449, which rounds up. And sine of 2.7894 gives me 0.34495, which rounds up. So the good news is you'll know if it's wrong. The bad news is, will you be able to figure out why? Or the hard part will be figuring out why. So again, if the original value inside the parentheses is positive, we're going to find wherever that sign is positive, wherever sign is positive. If it was cosine of 0.345, I'd find where cosine is positive. Tangent, secant, all those good things, you would determine where it's positive. Helen, it will say sine of, so the actual question, the wording is sine of S equals 0.345. That's what it looks like. And then we do the negative 1.
Wait, what does that mean?
She was saying, what's the actual question look like? And that's how it will be worded. Sine of S or sine of theta, because those are the same things. 0.345.
So when you see sine of theta or sine of S, we should know to put a negative 1.
Correct. If it says sine of an angle or a variable equals, that means I'm telling you what the sign is, you have to tell me what the angle is, and that means negative 1. Hey, Madeline, I just sent the attendance. I'm going to try to catch it, but in case you get marked absent, give your parents a heads up. I know there was an issue with Canvas. You don't have to worry about it. Just maybe give them a heads up. Okay, so now sine negative 1. So again, the wording on this would actually be sine of S equals negative 0.345. It would look like that. And we're trying to find the value of S. Where is sine negative on my circle? Which quadrant is sine negative?
The third and fourth.
3 and 4. So quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. So first thing I'm going to do is actually ignore the negative to find the reference angle. I'm going to say sine negative 1 of 0.345. I'm ignoring the negative to find the reference angle. And we already did this. This answer is the same thing we did before, which is 0.3522. The difference this time is that is not an answer because that's an angle in the first quadrant. And in the first quadrant, sine is not negative. In the third quadrant, we would do pi plus 0.3522. And in the fourth quadrant, we're going to do 2 pi minus 0.3522. So again, pi plus 0.3522, 3.4937, or 379 actually, which is 38. And 2 pi minus 0.3522. And I get 5.93098. So then 8 bumps up the 9, the 9 bumps up the 0.
Wait, why is there like the sign of S equals negative?
Because that's what it's actually going to, like that's the wording of the question.
But that is the same thing as.
That's the same thing as saying find the sine negative 1 of point. Yeah. I'm going to check because, see if Canvas is back up to see. I think I used S. I can't remember if I used S or I used theta. And we're back up.
I remember there's a good question where it was like, the problem you had to do was like 1 divided by the number.
Yeah, so that's the inverse functions, which I'll get to in a second.
But
Yeah.
said Canvas was back up.
Yeah,
Mine's not working.
it's up for me.
And then also, why did you did like the sign of S equals negative 0.345?
Yeah.
Then why did you put sign of negative?
Because to find the reference angle, we ignore the negative. The negative just tells us which quadrant to pick, but then to find the reference angle, we ignore that negative.
Okay.
So again, remember you can check these. So to check, I'm going to do the sine of 3.4938 and the sine of 5.9310, and both of those should give me my question. Negative 3.45 sine, not 5.9310, negative 0.345. So let's try, you try one. Tan negative 2.345. Go ahead, try that. Actually, so instead of, it's going to say this. Hang on, sorry. It's going to say, I want to check the variable. It's going to say theta. So tan of theta equals 3.4. What did I just give you? 4, 5, 3. I don't even remember what I gave you. Just do that one. So the tan of theta is negative, make it negative because those are harder, negative 3.453. You give me the value of theta, 4 decimal places.
If you left it the way you did before, we just plugged it into the calculator.
Yeah. Yeah. So be really careful. I mean, basically there's an equals or there's not. So what quadrants am I looking in?
4 and 2.
Good. 2, 4, and 2 we do pi minus the reference angle, and 4 we do 2 pi minus the reference angle. For the reference angle, we do tan negative 1, 3.453. Remember, make it positive to find the reference angle. 1.2889. So I do pi minus that and 2 pi minus that. And I get 1.853. 2 pi minus 1.2889. 4.9943. 3. I rounded wrong because I said 4 decimal places here. 1.8527. And then again, check it. Tan of 1.8527 and tan of 4.9943. Negative 3.4528 rounds up, and tan 4.9943, negative 3.4527, which rounds up.
I got 1.8528, but that's probably, I don't know if they're just like math.
You did 1.2889, so you want to keep whatever decimal it says to keep, make sure you keep all 4. So you should, when you do pi, make sure you use the pi button, and then.
Because I got 1.2888.
So it should have been tan, inverse tan, 3.453 should be 1.2889.
I copied the problem.
Just make sure if it says to keep the 3 decimal places or the 4 decimal places, you keep them the whole time.
No, when I copied the problem, I put 3.452.
Got you. So the good news is that these are multiple choice.
Oh.
The catch is one of them is none of the above.
Oh.
Yeah, there's always a
Is that
catch.
the answer for one of them?
Maybe. Questions on so this would be sine, cosine, tangent. All of those are just like the regular ones. Then you get to the inverse ones. I mean the reciprocal ones. So let's say I said cosecant of theta equals negative 2.345. So which trig function is the reciprocal of cosecant? Sine. So we're looking for where sine is negative, which happens in which 2 quadrants? Third and fourth. In the third, we add the angle to pi. In the fourth, we subtract it from 2 pi. So this is where you have to do sine of 1 over. So I do sine negative 1 of 1 over negative 0.2345. This is where you have to do the 1 over inside the parentheses, not with the sine. So when it's the inverse ones, when you're doing the sine negative ones, the sine goes on the outside, and then 1 divided by, I'm going to make this positive just to get the reference angle. 1 divided by 2.345, and I get that theta is 0.44055, so 0.4406.
But you still do the negative one.
Yep. Because you're still looking for an angle. So anytime your answer is an angle, you're doing the negative ones. So then I'm going to add it to pi, and then I'm going to subtract it from 2 pi. So pi plus 0.4406, 3.5822, 2 pi minus 0.4406, 5.8426. And those are my 2 answers. And again, I can check them, but to check them, cosecant of those angles means I'm going to do 1 over sine of 3.5822 and 1 over sine of 5.8426. So when I go to check it, I'm using the regular functions, and that's why I do 1 over, and I put the trig function in the bottom. Check them. I get negative 2.3447, which rounds up, and then 1 divided by sine, 5.8426, and I get negative 2.3448. So I know my answers are right. Say again.
How do you check them?
You're checking because if I said cosecant of 3.5822, you would type it in the calculator as that. 1 divided by the sine of 3.5822.
Okay.
And you put the trig function in the bottom this time because you're not using the negative ones. You're using the regular buttons. All right, we'll do one more practice, and then I'm going to leave you to work on your review. Okay, secant of theta equals 0.745. Actually, that can't, so that doesn't work because then cosine would be bigger, which is fine, that could be an answer, but let's change it to 1.745.
Wait, why wouldn't it work?
Because remember, we can't, that's like saying if I flip it, it's saying that the cosine's bigger than 1, and cosine can't be bigger than 1. So there could be no answer with the cosine or sine of theta equaling 1 point something or 2 point something, right? It can't be bigger than 1, because remember, you're saying then the hypotenuse is smaller than the adjacent side, or the hypotenuse is smaller than the opposite side.
But it didn't equal.
1 divided by point.
Oh, after you put it in the calculator?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it should give you an error. You should catch it. Yeah.
What number did you put in before?
I put 1 divided by 0.745. And then that gave me a cosine that was bigger than 1, which can't happen. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so which quadrants are we looking at? 1 and 4, because it would be cosine that's positive, right? So then you do the inverse cosine of 1 over 1.745, and you should get 0.9606, it rounds up to. So then in the first quadrant, that is my answer, and in the fourth quadrant, I do 2 pi minus that angle, and I get 5.3226. Again, you can check these. I would do 1 over cosine. So if I want to do secant of 0.9606, this is 1 over cosine of 0.9606, and I get the question, secant of 5.3226 equals 1 divided by cosine 5.3226. And you get your question. All right, questions for me on what's going to get covered tomorrow? So I would say you want your reference sheet to be minimal on this stuff. I would say you want all students take calculus. In the first quadrant, I would say theta is theta prime, which is the reference angle. In the second quadrant, I would do pi minus theta. Third quadrant, pi plus theta. Fourth quadrant, 2 pi minus theta. So those things I would definitely want to include. And then maybe an example, because this is where you guys are like, I think the most uneasy. If it said cosecant of 0.5, let's say, 1.5, this is the same thing as saying 1 over sine of 1.5. However, if I'm doing cosecant of theta equals 1.5, then I'm doing sine negative 1 of 1 over 1.5. So that's the only thing I would say. Maybe that's where a couple of questions have come from. I would make sure I would include an example when you do the trig function in the bottom and when you don't. Yep. So you do the trig function in the bottom when it's the regular buttons. When you're doing the inverse buttons, you don't put the trig function in the bottom. You do the trig function first, and then you put the value in the bottom.
So when you would be doing the inverse is when there's like a theta or an S.
Right. So if your answer is an angle, then you do the inverse button. So if it says the cosine or sine or trig, whatever, of theta equals something, that's when you're looking for an angle. You're usually going to have 2 answers.
And then it's like the cosecant of 1.5 would be just the over.
Correct. Yep. All right, so I'm actually going to switch things up because you only have I don't even know, 15 minutes? Less than that, right? You've got 10 minutes. What I want you to do is just work on the review, okay? So it's not very long. There's only a couple of questions, but there is an assignment there that says Chapter 6 test review, part 2 with the calculators, and I put the solutions on there. I want you to work on that now, and then tomorrow after you take your test, we'll worry about the tangent trig function. Don't even worry about it today, okay? It's not on tomorrow's part. Tomorrow, if you are a freshman, you have math first, so that will kind of be your catch-up over the weekend. If you're not a freshman, you're literally in A period for an extra amount of time, so you'll be able to take your test at the beginning, and then you'll be able to do the tangent stuff after. Does that make sense? Tomorrow's math for the freshmen.
Is sophomores
Sophomores is Monday, and then juniors and seniors is Wednesday of next week. Yeah, so you're just in the first class period for a extra long amount of time. You will be in here until 9:20. So again, we'll do the test at the beginning, the first 15-20 minutes test at the beginning, and then we'll do the tangent curve. So don't worry about it for today. And the solutions are on Canvas as well. If for some reason the solutions don't, if Canvas is not completely fully functional, later today I will send to you the solutions. I'll just find a way to get your emails or something and I'll send it to you. One way or another, I'll get those to you.